You're on the midweek edition of The Right Stand. I'm Anand Narsimhan. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a stark difference between the approach when we were at the onset of the pandemic in 2020 and on the onset of the second wave. The toss-up between life and livelihood, and then the call to ensure that the containment will be localized. Earlier in the day, I had the opportunity to speak to the Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, Dr. Rajiv Kumar. Listen in.
Rajiv ji, namaste, and thank you very, very much for making the time. But my first question to you, sir, this time the toss-up between life and livelihood, and I know you've had an interaction with about 35 think tanks across the country as to how to manage that. So what's been the thought process?
Well, the thought process has been, and we got this reaffirmed yesterday by all those people, coming together from across the country, that the conditions in the country are so diverse, in the context of pandemic and even otherwise, that one size, does not fit all. Now, then somebody can ask us, then what was last year? Last year, the national lockdown was because we needed time, to prepare the infrastructure. We needed to create the awareness. We needed to get the message across, which was the same message about, what is the big calamity that was facing us and what we needed to do at that time. So that was done at that stage. And as that yesterday, was shown, had a huge returns at that point of time in terms of saving the number, the spread and the mortality and the fatality, and gave us time to prepare all the necessary, sort of infrastructure, the PPE kits and the labs put in place for testing, etc., etc. But now, having got that in place, we now need a more localized, focus, because, cut the coat according to what the size is needed there, and that is where we have had this, hyper localized, strategy. Niti Aayog has been advocating it for a while, and that's now being implemented. And you can see the sort of the better outcomes of that, which is that all economic activity has not come to us, has not ceased at all at one time, and therefore also the level of migration has therefore been much less. And as the pulse, as it were, goes up in one place, it declines in the other. People can react, and people can and people can address and respond to that according to that situation.
Many would say, how would you buy to the criticism that this time around the spread in the second wave is so vast that more than 533 districts are showing a positivity rate of more than 10%, and perhaps the argument for a national lockdown for about 2 to 3 weeks has also been made internationally. Also, this call or the suggestion has been made. How would you react to it? That because there was not a national lockdown this time, COVID has actually spread more. Would you agree?
No, I don't agree at all. I mean, I simply don't agree, because you see the spread to the 533 positivity rate, but at the same time, there are districts where the positivity rate is 50% or was. I mean, there are some regions and states where you need far more, stringent measures than what you do in districts with a 10% of less positivity rate. And now, in any case, that 533 figure was true at one time, but now it's come down in the 200s that you have that figure. So the point is that what you want to use in one situation, you can't have the same in the others. Now, where I think where little bit of the guard was sort of let down at the state level and the district level is that last time, if you remember, when the migrants and outsiders went to any village or any south, they were kept in a quarantine in a school or in a local public, housing building, etc., for a period of a week or 10 days, and before they were let in. This time, people let their guard down and sort of let them come in, as it were, and that's what has been responsible for this spread. But to attribute that spread to the localized, approach that has been adopted, I think is spurious and doesn't stand scrutiny.
You've also made a very strong argument for continuing with not just economic activity, but also core infrastructure projects, because you say that they also are far greater employment generator compared to other sectors.
Yes, the fact is that core infrastructure, construction, roadways, ports, real estate, housing, Anybody can check that they have an employment elasticity 5 times more than the average employment elasticity. And then they have a huge multiplier effect. I mean, a real estate project is said to have about 200 backward linkages. I mean, as you can imagine, the steel and plastic and electricity, and all the material that you use, etc. All industries get benefit because of the multiplier effect of these construction projects. So, which is why we from NET have been advocating this very strongly, and also because you see there's the other side to it. Those who argue about boosting aggregate demand by helicopter money, now how much of helicopter money would you distribute to get a virtuous cycle up? Because at the moment our capacity utilization in the industry is less than 70%. It's 66% actually at the moment. And and the virtuous cycle begins when your capacity utilization reaches about 80% or more. Now, to get that aggregate demand up just by pumping in more consumption money, as it were, is not feasible. It's not feasible for an economy like us. And the size, we can't do $1.3 trillion stimulus as America has, as President Biden has done, because our size of the whole economy is just about 3 times that, or less actually. So, given the fiscal space, and given that you need sustained employment growth and you need sustained economic recovery, I think it is much better to keep to focus on the infrastructure than on consumption. And the last point here, Anand, is that if you boost consumption at a time when there are supply constraints, when industries can't start working because of the local lockdown, because of the workers not being there, etc., would only result in inflation. Because the supply that is required will not come forth, and therefore that is the reason for which we have advocated this, and we have not, we've not supported the argument for just doling out money. Just one change, and that, as you remember, under the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Yojana, monies have been given to those most affected in the rural, in our agriculture and rural sector, because that's also an essential service. And we made this essential from the very beginning, because we need that food security. So that's been done. But for the rest, I think what we've done is to take care of sustenance, rather than try to generate demand, because it is very difficult to identify the beneficiaries and then to sustain the payment to create a virtuous economic cycle.
True, because the opposition has been writing letter after letter demanding that at least 6,000 rupees be distributed and disbursed, and this is what you termed as helicopter money. One of the other criticisms that has come is the continuance with the Central Vista project, the Parliament and the Prime Minister's residence and the intent there. Your thoughts there, because the allegation is 20,000 crore rupees, even though it's spread over 6 years. Why put this money there? It's money wasted. You can build hospitals.
No, but just ask anybody. 20,000, 23,000 crore spread over 6 years. For a year, it comes to 3,000-4,000 crore. I mean, that's not even a drop in the amount that has been spent on the health sector in the last 5 or 6 years. This government has been so conscious about improving the health infrastructure, which we inherited in a complete shambles. And we have underinvested in the health sector for decades now. And we're making up. That whole thing will take time. But as I pointed out in the article yesterday, our expenditures on AIIMS is up 200%, and putting up all the facilities, they're up in a very big way. We have created so much infrastructure, but yet, of course, it is short. And we want to do more. But to argue that the Central Vista project, with its annual outlay of 3,000-4,000 crore, is causing a drop in the investment required in the health sector, is, I think, totally fallacious. It has been politicized beyond belief, and I'm not sure that that there is any logic or reason to it. Simply because that project in itself is an infrastructure project, and will have all the benefits that I've outlined before. But I mean, to reiterate my point, that this is, medical colleges, AIIMS, district hospitals have all benefited by the additional investment outlay that this government has made. And for next year, as you know, this budget has ramped it up by 135%. The health. Now, last part is that people forget that this is the government which has made health insurance possible for 500 million people, under the Ayushman Bharat. And we're establishing 150 health and wellness centers across the country. So, while recognizing that our health infrastructure needs to be refurbished, the argument that one particular project or another project should be stopped and be diverted to it, I think is purely going for very shallow optics, and I think for reasons other than economic logic.
You've also made an argument saying that yes, the number of AIIMS have gone up from 5 to 22. But as you augment the infrastructure, medical infrastructure, there also has to be an equal and perhaps enough augmentation of the medical services and professionals who have to be able to fill up those positions. So they have to go hand in hand. We can't just build up hospitals and set them up because there are no people to man them.
Absolutely right. And therefore, I think, thank you for bringing that up, because the reform process was started in Niti Aayog. We have, as you know, replaced the Medical Council of India with the National NMC, National Medical Commission, simply because the MCI was being very reluctant to expand the number of colleges and expand the number of seats, as it were. Now, I don't have the exact numbers, but my colleague, Dr. Paul, would be at would tell you that something like 70% increase has happened, or something about that. I shouldn't quote a number. In both the undergraduate seats and also the postgraduate, the specialist seats. So we are taking care of that. We are also looking into the possibility that there are a very large number of our doctors who come back from abroad and who have to take exams, to pass, and how we can give them some provisional certificate. They can they can be inducted in this. And as you know, many states now have come out with incentive schemes for attracting health professionals, doctors, nurses, and paramedics into the system. And several states have announced that so as to bring them on. And plus we have the offer from the armed forces that their hospitals and medical professionals can be used. So we are very cognizant of the fact that India's number of health professionals has to be increased, and we are taking steps in that direction.
Dr. Rajiv Kumar, may I ask you, because even though the government had issued notices and advisories to the state governments, the center, if I say, sometime in March about looking forward and watching out for a second wave, was it perhaps a little underprepared? Or is it local implementation that has seen the kind of oxygen crunch that we have seen, the sudden stress which we've seen in the major metros and some of the big impact cities like Mumbai and Delhi, and also some of the other state capitals, where there has been this rush for oxygen, rush for supplies?
Anand, that what you're citing is, of course, facts. That's a very grim reality that we've had to face. And there is also the fact that the government has taken extraordinary steps to ramp up the production of oxygen and the transport of oxygen, from the east to the west, because some of these locations were located there. And you've seen all the oxygen expresses and the 10,000 metric tons transported, etc. But the fact remains that the virulence of the second wave and the sort of the way it came, as it were, I mean, could not be expected, was not expected, was not modeled, was not estimated by the best modelers in the world, including the IMH, the famous Institute of Medical Health, in the US. None of them expected the sort of rise that we had. So that taken everybody by complete surprise. And that is what has caused. But yesterday we saw a presentation by Dr. Paul, which showed, one scientific modeler after the other, being unable to, to forecast or to that the peak and the speed at which that was gone. I think it's quite honestly, it's really one must salute the ingenuity and the hard work of all the people who are involved in having been able to meet. Of course, we should have been, been able to do it before, but given where we were and given the virulence and the unexpectedness of the second wave, I think it took us by surprise, but we have responded very, very coherently to it. And now, of course, thankfully, the supply demand situation is much better. So I think yes, the speed of the second wave was totally unexpected, and not just by us, but by most scientific modelers and observers. And that was the reason for a temporary, as it were, shortfall in the infrastructure and also in oxygen supply.
Dr. Rajiv, is there light at the end of the tunnel? How much of a negative impact on the economy has the second wave had? Because you're saying Forex or FDI hasn't been an issue till March 2021 at least. We've done very well.
The highest level of FDI into the country in 2021, and our reserves, foreign exchange reserves, have risen. And our exports, as you notice, between January to March this year have been the highest ever. Not just the pre-pandemic, not last year, but highest ever. We looked at the numbers between 2011 to 14, and this has been the best. The January to April, actually, 4-month period has been the best ever in pretty much in India's export history. And I think we are well on way to perhaps reach more than $350 billion, if not $400 billion of exports this year. And that will again become one of the major drivers of economic recovery. As I said last year, on the first wave, people will be surprised by the strength of our recovery when the second wave subsides in our country. And that happened last year too. In the second half of fiscal year 2021, we surprised. And again, this will again happen because, all the fundamental work or the reforms have been now put in place to really incentivize and ramp up private entrepreneurship and private investment. We will see that happening. Plus, the government is also taking care in ramping up capital expenditure, which will crowd in, the private investment as well. So I am surely beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and this tunnel has been, as I said, quite unexpected, but we'll soon be out of it, and then the economy will begin to recover. By the time, I think by the end of the first quarter, which ends in June, and the recovery will begin.
So you're saying that it's around the corner by about say by the end of the first quarter, by end of June is when you think things should happen.
As I said, on the basis, statistically, April to June quarter will have very high growth, but that is because of a low base. So I don't want to go there, and I don't want to. But the growth will no doubt be lower than what it would have been without the second wave. That's very clear. What I'm really saying is that by the time the wave subsides, and that's in the realm of uncertainty, because none of us can say what happens to the pandemic, how it folds out. But given the fact that we are now going to be ramping up vaccination, and that creates more certainty, I think July onwards we will see the economy bouncing back, and then see it going from strength to strength.
Dr. Rajiv Kumar, we'll pause here. I look forward to you joining us again in terms of when we talk about the reforms path and the process, when things are a certain semblance of normalcy starts coming to us, and then we say, where are we headed now, and what is it that we have done which is going to take us there? I look forward to having that conversation very, very soon.
Thank you.